So I started out when I was literally in middle school as a teenager. And I started out making movies on my dad's, home video camera. Um, I remember I always just wanted to just yank it out of his hands and try my own attempt to get a shot because he was always filming us. Um, and then it just continued to evolve to, hey, I don't want to just capture our trip down to the beach. I want to capture this little story I just made up, off the cuff and shoot with my friends in our backyard. And it continued to evolve to all the way by the time I get into high school, when I'm trying to decide what to do for college. It just seemed like a natural fit to pick film as my major. But I didn't realize by the time the 4 years were up at the end of college, I'd be presented with another question that really is it's the question that can really be that roadblock that stops people from continuing film out of school, which is, how are you going to make money? How are you going to pursue this as a living? Because really it means, have you actually learned how to pursue this as a trade, as a business? Because I do think that even the school I went to, we learned the craft very, very well, especially the production side of it. It definitely taught me a really good standard that is pretty much held over to, all the future projects I hopped on, whether they be my own or other people's. Even when I was in Panavision for the 4 years that I was working there, it was still something that, grounded me to kind of give me that understanding and base of how things actually work. Because really, you can't just learn that stuff just from looking on the outside. You have to learn it with hands-on. And that was something I was really surprised by with film school, because it gets a bad rep. It gets a bad rep that you just, learn theory, or you just, you think you know everything about the world and you don't. And part of that I think is partially true, but it also depends on the school you went to. And there are definitely schools out there that will teach you a lot of the hard skills. But what I do feel that a lot of the film school doesn't teach you are some of the hard skills that are kind of kept on the actual business side. I felt I was ready for set. I felt I was ready for, that kind of work lifestyle. But I did not feel prepared of how did I want to pursue a career as a creative to write and direct my own films. So that's something that is being self-taught right now, and that's how I'm pursuing filmmaking now. There was a huge night and day, difference from when I was making shorts in film school versus out. Because in film school, a lot of the stuff that I needed was built in, even the budget sometimes, if it was for the actual film program, or I did a short for one of the student run bodies for one of the clubs, and so we had a budget for that as well. And so it was a huge difference because I didn't have all the same tools at my disposal. I had to go back to the days I was at in high school, where it was all, guerrilla filmmaking, self-taught. But there was a refinement I definitely felt of, how to do things a little more efficiently, how to communicate my ideas and talk about films, and just how I wanted to shoot, what I wanted to shoot differently. There's a new level of experience, and that's something I keep trying to build upon with every new project. It's just hard because it doesn't pay the bills yet. It's all out of my pocket. That's where the budget's coming from. And that's the thing I'm trying to figure out next, and really see if I can still chip away at it and see if the passion continues to push me forward. And so that it's not just a passion at the end of the day. Not that there's nothing wrong with it being a passion or even a hobby, but I know for me it's it'd be really cool to get some of these bigger ideas I have that does require a bigger budget made, and so I definitely let my dreams guide me in those ways. But I'm still also challenging myself and pushing myself to learn this as an artist that's trying to pursue a business, not an artist that's bogged down by the idea that this is a product, but still, it's still going to be a film, and that's all I want to make. I just want to make movies. This is for you.
Thanks. Sam, they're here, all right? They can't find you, so stay here and be quiet.
Can't promise you if you don't pay, you're not gonna hurt her. You don't wanna put Sam in danger now, do you?
He was with that fucking brunette. I mean, you have to remember her. She was all over you. Didn't she give you Molly or something?
This is not about the money. She needs help.
So, Morning After, it's a short film that's a proof of concept for a feature script I'm actually in the middle of rewrites for. But the short, it basically is the inciting incident at the very beginning of the film of how the events basically start and begin. So you're introduced immediately into what the conflict is, which is this aimless, directionless, post-college grad that doesn't know what the hell he's going to do for money, what he's going to do for a living, and he just has one night that's a little too crazy, but realizes, he just rubbed shoulders with members of the LA mob, and now next thing he knows, he's on the run for his life with his friend. And so for me, going about writing this, again, whenever I try to write something, I try to ground it in something that I have a personal connection to, whether that be an actual experience, an idea, or even more so just like a question of how does one even try to create an identity in something as chaotic as a world that just wants to take and take and take from you. And so for me, with this story, I would take these questions and experiences I had, even just like in the LA nightlife, and just things I've encountered, whether it be different film festivals or parties. There'd be a lot of gigs I'd be working and shooting and live events, and there'd be some things I'd see that I'm like, wow, okay, I thought this was just in the movies. People do this in real life too, and just like the wild things that you can easily just fall into and not realize what you're getting yourself into and how in over your head you are. And so for me, again, because I try to ground all of the stories I write and things that I know, I try to lean into that, because I do feel like that makes you a stronger storyteller, because it's leaning into the things that the stories that and that's the axiom that most screenwriting teachers will tell you, is just write what you know. And so from that, I started with what I knew, and then I just kind of just embellished, added more things to make it more fun, or it was a hodgepodge of different stories and experiences, or even things that I heard from other people and my friends. So at the end of the day, it was a fever dream. It was a fever dream of a story, writing that, and just really have an excuse to just make something fun, but still feel like that I can pull from some of those existential questions even for myself, which we explore more in the feature, because it takes a lot of a darker path than the short kind of entails, but really just leaning into those things that and then of course for me, just lean into the things that inspire me, some of my favorite filmmakers as well, because I've always loved psychological thrillers and the tension you could be put on. I love it when a movie forces me to physically come to the edge of my seat, because then I just get that much more invested into it. And so I just hope that I can create movies that can get people invested into the story too. For me, I can't name my favorite filmmakers, of course, without naming one that I know everybody probably has in their top 5, top 3 favorite filmmakers. But for me, it was still very personal. When I was in 11th grade, junior year, when I was starting to think about college and what to do for filmmaking. I saw Inception, of course, by Christopher Nolan, and it was crazy for me at that point because I had done a book report on dreams, like literally the semester before, and I was already dipping my toes into like Jungian psychology, and so when I saw that movie with my friends, it like literally blew my mind because I was just like, whoa, this like literally lines up with like a lot of stuff that like I've been like researching into and looking into, because I was already like I already grew up with a lot of like crazy nightmares and dreams. I used to lucid dream at a certain point and then stopped because I ended up having like a mild episode of like a sleep paralysis, so that was like, okay, don't do that again. But yeah, that movie was insane because there were just so many things in it that felt so real that I had a immediate personal connection to, as well as like the fact that like, one, the way the story is structured and written with like them getting ready to like perform this heist, Nolan is compared as like this analog of like how meetings are run for when movies are made. So for him, it's in a sense an analog and a love letter to filmmaking, the actual process, because they're trying to create a story that's convincing for Fisher to believe, so they can implant this idea to dissolve his father's business. And so it was just insane because it was like, oh wow, it literally has like, it's a hodgepodge of all my favorite things about dream psychology and dream psychology, Jungian psychology, and filmmaking and storytelling in general. And it was like, okay, maybe I could pursue this as a career, because if I can literally just like make stuff that I'm interested in and I want to talk about, then like I'm done. I'm set. So he's definitely up there in the top 3. Another one would be Darren Aronofsky, director of Black Swan, Requiem for a Dream. The film I got exposed to in college, freshman year was The Fountain, and then senior year was Mother, and 2 totally drastically different films, but both amazing. I know Mother was pretty controversial, but I love that movie. But I just loved, he definitely sparks that interest in psychological thrillers and playing with like that fabric of reality that even Nolan does too, of like what's real, what's not real, and messing with the audience in that aspect, what's allegorical and what's literal. That's something I really enjoy. And then I think the third, it was someone I got exposed to in film school. He's a famous Polish director that blew up in the 90s with his film, the trilogy, the 3 Colors trilogy, Blue, White, and Red, which were all based on the French flag and different aspects of it. I got exposed to him, and I remember seeing one of his earlier feature films he made, because he used to be a documentary filmmaker, and so it was really interesting to see what he did for his first couple, and just most of his feature films, was because of the Communist Party really cracking down on people that would would either say something against the government, or they would try to smuggle in art or books or anything that was from the Western world. Kieslowski would follow these stories and realize he couldn't name names anymore, because as soon as he would name a name about someone, that could lead to another connection, and get all these people taken in. And so he started moving into narrative filmmaking, because then he could tell these really powerful stories but not have to name names and change the details, combine other people's stories, so that way he could still tell these stories that are true, even if the stories themselves are fiction. They're based on things that really happened. But even then, like, he is able to add something in this like brewing process, where he kind of just sprinkles in this like aspect of like a mystical element. And Blind Chance, it's you see 3 different timelines of the protagonist trying to get on this train, and what results differently from that. So he was one of the first filmmakers to explore the multiverse, or even in the Double Life of Veronique. That movie, he explores the connections with doppelgangers. So he's able to take a lot of these like even like folklore ideas and add this like modern mysticism to it. That really, if you try to make that in America, it'd be seen as like a gimmick used either in like a rom-com or like one of the things that define it as like a sci-fi film. You know, it's not really something you could categorize now, but it's still something that like kind of captures that like awe and mystery, and that's something I really want to explore in my filmmaking as well, because he honestly is like such a huge inspiration in that matter. That's a tough question, because when I was a kid, I had all these crazy ideas when I was writing stories, and you know, I would have a lot of like crazy dreams that it would inspire me to like sit down and like put, you know, pen to paper and just write out the whole idea. But if I were to do that now, if there was something that I could make now with a decent budget, it'd probably be my thesis film I never got to make in film school. It was something I was really passionate about, and it was something that I was really depressed that I didn't get to do, because it was the tail end of film school for me, where I had switched gears because I realized that I had let this imposter syndrome of like not wanting to, not feeling good enough to be a writer-director stop me from being a writer-director, and caused me to just like, okay, maybe I'm just going to be a cinematographer, because I know enough about cameras, I'll just do that. But I felt like I was really deprived of like a different outlet for myself to tell stories that I'm like, no, this is still important to me, I want to write and direct. But the story, think of like dark fantasy aspects that you see from Guillermo del Toro's like Pan's Labyrinth, or even just like the fantasy elements you'd see in like, you know, even Lord of the Rings, and treat that as it's a dark fairy tale, but like children's story that the protagonist is trying to write, and he's passionate about being like a children's book author, but he realizes that the things he's writing about are actually analogs for traumas in his life that he's never really worked through completely, let alone healed through fully. Which at the end of the day, trauma, like most people with traumas, they're gonna carry them with the rest of their lives. For me, it's something I've been working on a lot with, like some really insane religious traumas that I've had to really reconcile with recently, because I grew up in a very, very religious home and religious environment. And one aspect of that I want to explore in this film is how much that religious environment really made any sort of like talk or dialogue about like sexual health, just sexuality in general, made it taboo and made it impossible to talk about. And so if you pile on top of that sexual abuse, you make those kind of conversations just literally impossible to talk about in a lot of religious environments, because literally there are no like practical tools to have a discourse about this, because everything's kind of left out of this like abstract of like purity, good and evil, and you're just dirty and terrible for even having like one little thought. And so for this story, the main character is a young man who's, you know, trying to complete college so he can pursue literature and become a writer, trying to go through these like religious traumas that actually are just like the tip of the iceberg of what he really experienced, which was actual sexual abuse in his early childhood, and how much of that just gets lost, or even just like just the male experience of like, you know, the whole bathroom locker room talk, especially with sports. It was something that I definitely felt very very much like an outsider, because it was never something I even felt comfortable participating in, let alone like laughing at. Because for me, it was like, I can't even imagine like talking about like girls in a certain way, you know? But I knew I wasn't the only one, but I was not in the vocal minority that was bullying and taking control of the group, you know? And so there are a couple of films like that have lightly explored this, or very much explored it very well, that I definitely have been inspired by. It's a Belgian film called Bullhead, from I think like the early 2010s, where it explores the story of this man who he was abused at a very early age, and a lot of that abuse comes from like that kind of like culture and talk of like, you know, objectifying women, and just what it's like just for boys going through puberty to eventually become men, that transition, and how it doesn't really touch on like the religious aspect, but for me, how much like the religious aspect really does devoid that. But for that film, I think it really just shows like the whole like false sense of like stoic masculinity, of if I want to be strong, then I can't appear to have any weaknesses, and that toxic trait really just like still something that permeates even today, where I even seen it myself in my relationships, where I'm like, okay, I gotta open up and be vulnerable. I can't just pretend this doesn't affect me, because again, that becomes a disingenuous gesture, or aspect of a relationship you have with someone, because you're not communicating, and so yeah, that's something that I would really like to explore, because again, I think just masculinity in general, it's still something that's like really, really hard to talk about, because men don't like talking about these things, and so it's something I really, really want to try to explore, and try to get a conversation going. I can't say it enough just how amazing Teon and Emma were for this project, for Morning After. I mean, you have to take note that we shot this in the middle of a pandemic, 2020 in the fall, and everyone's working 9 to 5s, so we're all, trying to, squeeze in these production days on our weekends or days off that we can have. So the whole thing was very, very stressful, or at least could have been stressful, having to wear masks and get COVID tested, but they made such a huge impact on the morale on set, of just having such a great spirit, great attitude, just giving us that sense of camaraderie, just having a really good time, where most of our crew, we all know each other maybe through film school or from work, so they were coming in as outsiders, because they were people that we casted on the outside through backstage, and they came in and we were just basically all family by the end of it, which was fantastic. Like, I can't say it enough, because that's something that you can only be just grateful for when you're the director and you're able to have everyone just have a good time and get along. Because when you have that one person that can be very, very sour, temperamental, or even a little narcissistic, like big-headed, it could be really detrimental to the morale of the set, because then it starts affecting everyone, because it almost feels like everyone's walking on eggshells around that one person. And so not having that on this set was fantastic, but even the opposite, having an amazing set where everyone is amazing, and again, it was just such a good time. Couldn't have done it without Emma and Teon, because they always came prepared, they always knew their lines, and once we rehearsed their marks, they knew their marks, where to go, and they just embodied the characters. Like, they were both able to bring this like level of intensity I just could not find in other actors. When we were auditioning, no one was able to bring the same level for these characters that they were able to give us. So again, amazing to work with, highly recommend. Very, very professional, and again, just really, really good people. That's always the hardest part, because you can always spend more time getting more shots, adjusting the lighting, adjusting the performance, the blocking, everything. There's always more time to do it. But if we were all to do that, we all would end up like George Lucas, who continued to make edits to the original trilogy when they were already done. You know what I mean? Like, there's a point to when you need to stop and you need to keep going. And it's making that call, because sometimes maybe you spent too little time, not enough time, where you're going to need to go back and do that reshoot, because you should have spent more time here, And I think one of the best ways that helped us stay on schedule, one was having really good communication. the three most important relationships on set for me, for all my projects, it's been my relationship as a director, with my relationship with my DP, who was Sam, and then my relationship with my AD, who was Alyssa. And we always had to circle up as soon as we got done with a shot, or as soon as we got done with a setup. And it's like the Holy Trinity, these three, because once we're able to establish what we're doing next, what we have time for, and what we fell behind on, then we can prioritize and delegate. Because as soon as we get this conversation going, Sam can go and talk to camera and lighting and tell them where to set up. I can go to talent, we do rehearsals and practice blocking, and then Alyssa, our AD, can go to hair, makeup, wardrobe, anything else that needs our attention, so she can relay the message. So it was super important to have a really strong, lifeline, a really strong communication just between those three, because again, like, without those three, things can really break down very, very quickly, especially if you don't make it a habit to circle up after all the big shots, because sometimes you're going to need to make an adjustment. Sometimes there'll be plenty of times where we had to combine shots, cut shots out completely, or just say, you know what, we're going to have to come back to this. And it's better we come back so we don't keep everyone here past the time than they need to be. But I think that another equally important part for staying on schedule for us was also just having those important conversations in pre-production. It wasn't perfect. There could have been more done for sure, but we were also very, very limited on the time we could do. And so making the best of what we could do. So I usually have an insanely detailed shot list that I'll send out. And so that will usually be the starting point outside of the script for when I'm talking to all the department heads. We'll look at the shot list. And I think it's just, it came from my days as a DP, just really trying to take things in order of setup. Because again, you have to be very pragmatic about how are you going to shoot in the day. So what are you going to prioritize? Or is this going to be someone's wrap out time? Okay, prioritize their shots first. What about labor? What about effort? How much work is it going to take to set up one setup to the other? Okay, if there's 3 different lighting setups in the living room, even if they're chronologically not in order of the script, shoot them all back to back, especially if there's overlapping talent. It's only things you can really learn until you've shot a film. It's oh, I could have shot this better. And again, it all comes down to, it's almost like this puzzle, which can be a really fun aspect of it that I really enjoy. Even as an AD, I've enjoyed it when I'm making the schedule. It's just so I wonder, do we even need this actor to come in this day? Because we could probably get all of this stuff done the day before and not eating for both days. Just really doing these it's almost like you're doing a hack, right? Of oh, if we just move over around these setup times to this day, because we're gonna be at this location, then we can save this other day for when we do this company move and not feel like we have to rush. And those were conversations we were having all the time. And yeah, I think that was what was really able to help us be on schedule, because again, because I think it did help me when I did DP a lot in film school, just to get more of the pragmatic tools of how production works. Sometimes the director's the only one that sees what's needed. So you as a director have to make that call of you have enough for the performance or you need to move on. If you have enough for the edit. And it's really important to know how the edit's going to go as a director, because if you don't know where the shot's going to go, especially for the performance, if how well you're going to see it, if it's going to be a close-up or wide, how much effort it's going to take, all that comes into consideration, because you may be the only one that can make that final call of we're going to move on or not. And so there were definitely moments I had to make some really tough calls, but they all ended up being worth it at the end, even if we have to shoot more later, because I wanted just things to be more qualitative in what we shot, as opposed to just rushing a ton of amount of shots. So for me, I was always trying to combine shots as well. Okay, I know originally had like all these different over-the-shoulder angles to like, you know, play with the 180 line, flip the world around, flip the scene around, the location. You might just need to start combining them because we don't have enough time for all that, for all this intricate blocking. Because I'm a huge fan of blocking. I love seeing like Woody Allen does it a lot in a lot of his scenes, where it's just these two people scenes. They're like in an apartment, and they're talking to each other. And it's usually when Gordon Willis, the DP who did The Godfather, when he's shooting for Woody Allen, like you'll see these like really long shots of whether it's on the tripod and it's just going back and forth of just this crazy intricate blocking that's like happening in front of you. I've always been a huge fan of that. It's been so much fun to kind of like just kind of play with that. It's like an aspect of like theater that sometimes gets lost, that you don't always see in movies, of just like all this motion, this movement, and how much that can really create a rhythm for the scenes, because the lines are going to have a rhythm, the music is going to have a rhythm, but also the movement for where actors are standing, moving, how they're looking at each other, what are they doing to each other, you know, is one cooking for the other person, are they fighting, so they're throwing stuff at them, like it's going to affect it. So I've always been a huge fan of like trying to like get that movement in, but that's the hard part, is trying to get the balance of like, okay, how much am I going to be able to like express this like creative visual aesthetic that I want to create for the film, when I need to start like going to the chopping block right now and say, hey, I only have so much time. And again, that just comes with like practice, and just keep shooting, and then it definitely becomes easier when to make those hard calls of like when to move on and when to stay put and say, okay, no, we're gonna stay and finish this shot. I think one of the hardest parts for shooting Morning After was definitely the pandemic. That put a huge stop on our schedule, because we were supposed to shoot in spring of 2020 and then push it to fall, which I'm surprised we even did that within a year. We could have pushed it for a whole year, honestly. But mind you, also, like, we're all working 9 to 5, so everybody was already making sacrifices to try to get on this project and get it made, whether it's like a squeezing in that time on that weekend or we're taking days off, right? So there were already so many huge sacrifices being made, as well as, you know, I'm pulling as much as I could out of pocket just to, you know, pay for everything. And, you know, I want to make sure my crew gets fed. So, but even the money that I'd saved up for when we were originally going to shoot in the spring of 2020, that ended up going to rent when I got laid off because of the pandemic. Even that layoff, I had a whole camera package lined up at Panavision that I was going to do for this shoot. And I ended up losing that because like I didn't work there anymore. It was an employee package, which really sucked, and it was really sad because, you know, my DP and I, we both really liked working there because, you know, we were able to like get such a sweet deal with the camera package. But at the end of the day, we just kind of went back to our roots and said, you know what, one day we'll go back and get a camera package again from them. But for now, we're just gonna work with what we have and make that's what we do, because with what we have, because it's like if we knew what we needed just minimally to shoot this well, even the lighting wise, and so it was just leaning into the limitations that we had. I mean, even the fact that like I wanted it to be like a black and white, like almost like a neo-noir in that sense, where we're taking those homages of noir itself in the lighting. That limitation benefited us, because then we didn't have to think about certain things like color temperature, and we could be really specific about like the framing, and just make sure it was just exposed. So even though there were so many things that were hard about this project, those limitations that we had, those are things we leaned into. It's like, okay, so what can we do with this space, with this apartment? It was my roommates and my old apartment in Woodland Hills. So it was like literally just using everything we knew, using everything we had at our disposal. And we had acquired like some lights and some sound equipment just over the years. So it was just literally just like pulling favors, asking friends to help, and then just casting these really good actors to be in it, but really just taking our time and being patient with it, because again, it could have died in post. It could have even died in production. Like we could have maybe shot half of it and just given up, but it really meant a lot just having the people that we did have, because again, once they were on for the whole ride, and that made the biggest difference in this project just even getting finished by the end of it all. I am doing rewrites for the feature of Morning After. This is a proof of concept. It's literally like only the first act, really, and very stripped down too. You know, there are characters I actually set up in the first act in the feature that aren't even present in the short. So yeah, there's a lot that I'm already playing with and working on with that, and it's been a lot of fun, like just expanding that and just kind of see where else the story, will go. Because the way we have the short end, it's a cliffhanger. So like the possibilities are endless of like where else the story could go. So it was just really fun, like kind of like giving an answer to that. But I also am still sitting on that script that I mentioned before about my thesis project. There was a lot of things that I came back to, and I already started rewriting just because I feel like, depending on like what state in life you're in, you're going to gravitate towards different themes, ideas, elements, and there's some things I realized I was gravitating towards in college that I don't gravitate towards anymore, or I come back at with a different lens. And it's been very helpful in a lot of cases. It does make some parts hard, because then it makes me realize, I had like a different intention with this. So sometimes it's almost like I get like a amnesia where I forget why I inserted this character or this line, and then when I remember, I was like, do I still want that idea, or do I want to come in with this like new angle? Because I think it was Sorkin who talked about screenwriting, where when he'll do a rewrite, he'll literally just like start over from scratch and try to, it's Sorkin, because he mentions it in his masterclass, because he talks about how literally when he does a rewrite, he literally doesn't like open up the old script. He tries to rewrite the old script from memory. That's such a hard process, because that takes so long, especially for a feature. And sometimes it's like that memory could even be like limiting, where it's like, maybe I should just completely reapproach this scene in a totally different way. So I started that process with my thesis, where I started writing, from a new angle and didn't look at the old stuff. But it's still something I'm sitting on. I think it's just kind of part of the process, and as an artist, you have to experience things for yourself. Have that lived experience to know like what your voice is in these stories. And so for me, I may be sitting on these like 2 or 3 scripts, treatments for them and stuff like that. But for me, if they were to get produced this year versus like next 2 years, 3 years, they'll definitely be different films. Huge part of it will be the same, but they'll be different. So it's something I'm really excited about, because like I have no idea where it's gonna go, or what I'll end up doing with it. But I think that's kind of the whole point I mentioned earlier, just try to enjoy the journey as opposed to just getting obsessed with the destination. I know the final film is like, the glory, the amazing, final product of the film. It's finally embodying everything you wanted the characters, the actors are saying the lines that you wanted them to say the way you wanted to say them. But like the journey of it all is such an important process, because those highs of like cracking that scene, cracking that edit, or even like finding that moment on set, like that's why we obsess over the process of filmmaking too, because it's not just because we get to just only make a movie and show it to people. We get to actually make the movie. It's not just the showing, it's the actual making. So yeah, that's what I'm working on now, is just a couple scripts and edit this. I also have another short that I'm sitting on that I literally shot in the middle of pandemic too. That's been in post-production hell. So I'm finally like taking time to like sit down and like start editing that as well, because it's a small piece, but the actors were like amazing and they killed it. So really just trying to enjoy this journey in the process of like whatever free time I can give it towards this, and then maybe one day I can have that budget to pay myself and like make a project. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now.